Welcome back to Extra Dirt, the podcast designed to help you and your life group put down deeper roots relationally and spiritually. A really fun story this week in church as Dan was talking about a centurion whose servant was sick and who is absolutely just healed at the word of Christ. And as you talk about this in a group, I want you to keep in mind the specific context of the centurion. Here's a guy who has tons of authority, and when he speaks, people act. And he looks at Jesus and he understood that as Jesus is healing people, Jesus is not doing fancy magic tricks and misdirection and things like that. But when Jesus speaks, his word, his command has such authority that things happen. And he recognizes this in Jesus and he says, if anybody can heal my servant, it's Jesus. Because when he says that something happens, it happens. And so he sends his elder friends. They totally get this wrong idea. They think that they should argue that the centurion deserves to have his request granted, which Jesus probably just kind of laughs at. And then we see later when the centurion sends his friends that really what the centurion is thinking is, I don't deserve this, but I know that you can do it if you want. And so I'm going to ask you just on the hope that you will be merciful, that you will be loving. And this is really challenging for us as believers. We tend to fall into this mentality that if I'm having a bad day or a bad week, if I'm not super close with Jesus, then when I pray, my prayers won't be answered because I'm in such a terrible place, or I haven't been faithful, or I haven't given enough, or I haven't served enough, or fill in the blank. But the reality is that God gives out of his mercy, not out of our deserving. And so we approach God asking for good things in humility, saying, look, I know, God, you have authority to do whatever you want, and I might not understand what you're doing, but I ask you to do this because I know that you have the power to do it, and I know that you're a loving and a giving and a good God. And so we ask, not trying to convince God I deserve it, or so-and-so deserves it. God, please save them because they've been a very, nice and loving and caring person. But instead we say, God, would you provide healing just because you are good, because that's in your nature. And it changes the way we see God, and we begin to be righteous, to please him and not to get things from him, to please him and not to earn so much his favor. So it's a cool little picture. The centurion says, look, don't get me wrong, I don't deserve anything from you, but I know who you are and I know your authority, and for that reason I approach you. In the book of James, where I had you also read, that's that same mentality, is that if we need wisdom, if we need God to guide us through something, then we ask God, because he is a giving and good God, because he loves to give us wisdom, because he loves to see us live according to his way. And so we ask, not because we deserve it, but we just ask believing that that's who he is and that's what he'll give us. And we do so believing without doubting, James says. One of the patterns that we see in Scripture is that when people approach Jesus expecting something with faith, then Jesus responds in kind with answers and with healing and with miracles. And when people approach God with scorn or with doubt or with animosity, the results are not so great. And so we encourage you to redefine in your mind, if Abraham was considered righteous because of his faith, and if Hebrews 11 tells us that without faith it is impossible to please God, and if the centurion's faith is the defining characteristic that Jesus marvels at, and if James says when we ask for wisdom we need to do it with faith, believing that God will give us what we ask for, then perhaps it's really important that we just start considering that what Jesus wants from us is faith. He wants us to trust him. He wants us, like the centurion, to say, I know you have authority, and if you want to do something, boom, it's done. And God, I ask you this, not hoping that maybe you might possibly do it, but I ask you this saying, God, I know you're good. I know you provide good things to those who ask, and so I trust that if this is within the bounds of what your will might contain, then you just say the word, and that prayer will be answered. So pray with faith this week, especially as you wrap up this meeting. I want to encourage you with your people to say, all right, we've got these prayer requests. Let's with faith approach God. Let's approach him knowing that these are entirely within the bounds of his power to do. And if he says yes, then we will see those answers miraculously. So, in terms of practical content, I want to encourage you to avoid a couple types of questions. When we're talking with a group, we want conversation to kind of flow. We want to keep the ball in play, so to speak. And so if somebody answers a question, then a lot of times, in order to keep them talking, we'll ask a follow-up question. Unfortunately, when we ask the follow-up question like why or why not, what we're doing to some degree is we're putting that person on the defensive. We're saying, explain yourself. I'm not sure I buy that. And maybe we don't intend it that way, but subtly it can come across as that. And so if I have an idea, as somebody in the group who's maybe a little bit more shy, and you ask the question, and I know that as soon as I present my idea, you're going to say, why? Why is that? Then I might not be as prone to jump in and offer my response. So instead you want to try to reshape those follow-up questions. Instead of saying why, if their answer was a little bit short, you might say, could you explain further? Or is there, keep going with that. Or you might ask somebody else, is there something you'd like to add to that? Or I see you nodding, what do you like about what he said? Is there any way in which you might add to what he said? And so you get people responding to each other, and you allow them to talk further if they want to. Is there anything more you want to go on there? Or you also have given them the place where they say, no, that's about my whole answer. So if they haven't thought through it super deep, then they don't feel bad for saying something that they don't have a huge grand explanation for. And so try to look at the questions that you tend to ask, and maybe you even write them down or have somebody write them down for you. If I ask a lot of follow-up questions, what do those questions sort of convey? Do they convey the sense like your idea is okay but maybe not good enough? Or do they put people on defensive, defend yourself because I'm not satisfied with that answer? Because what you want to invite is discussion, and you want the people in the group to feel comfortable refining and fine-tuning what people are saying around them, without having people feel like, hey, if I offer an answer, I'm going to be put on the spot, or I'm going to be shot down, and it's going to be totally awkward. So with your questions, try to shy away from the why questions if somebody gives an answer, and move more towards is there anything you want to add to that? Ask other people to add on as well. And once your group has kind of got this idea that when somebody answers, it's not teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student, but that everybody gets to chip in if they want to, then conversation will take on a much more fluid and dynamic nature, and you'll find that you have a much better time as a group, and you may even just flat out run out of time because everybody's putting their 2 cents in, and you're like, oh, okay, there's our week. So it is great when your conversation is fluid, it's natural, it's full of trust, and that's the kind of group that we're looking for. So don't shoot that down by asking the defensive-minded questions. That's all I got for you this week. I look forward to seeing you here again next week. Take care, and God bless.